Reproduction is the process of making new offspring or daughter cells from the parent organism. This is an important life process because it is essential for the long term survival of any given species. It ensures that a species survives in a long term. And during the process of reproduction, all the organisms will pass their genetic information, which is the DNA, to the offspring. This is the most important step in any form of reproduction. The new organisms that are being generated should obtain the DNA from the parent organism. Now, all the living organisms that we find in nature, irrespective of their size, needs to reproduce. However, there are two different ways in which the organisms can do this process. So in this video, we will be going into the world of asexual and sexual forms of reproduction. So we will see what sets them apart and why both of them are absolutely essential for the life on this earth. So let's start with asexual reproduction first. Now, asexual reproduction is the simpler of the two given methods. It just involves one single parent. There's only one parent involved in this method of reproduction, and there are no fusion of gametes involved. So gametes are the reproductive cells in our body, but they have no role or they are not produced in organisms that undergo asexual mode of reproduction. But the cool part here about this is that the offspring that are produced through asexual reproduction are completely identical to the parent organism. They are completely identical and can be considered as clones. They are literally clones of the parent organism from which they are produced. This is because they reproduce through a cell division process called mitosis. So all the organisms that undergo asexual reproduction carry out a cell division process called mitosis, where a single cell usually gives rise to two identical cells. So both the cells that are produced in this process will be exactly identical to the parent organism. That's why they are also called identical clones. Prokaryotes, which include bacteria and archaea, and some of the eukaryotes reproduce by this mode of reproduction. The one advantage with asexual reproduction is it is super fast. As only a single parent is involved, it is quicker, and most of the bacteria can actually double their numbers in just a span of 20 minutes. This is true for some of the bacteria, and provided the conditions are all ideal for their growth or reproduction. Now, the energy expenditure is also very less for asexual reproduction. This rapid multiplication is a huge advantage for organisms like bacteria, fungi, which can essentially double their numbers in a very short span of time. However, there's one major disadvantage with this kind of reproduction in that the daughter cells that are produced do not exhibit any genetic diversity or genetic variation. So genetic diversity in simple terms refer to the diversity on the DNA sequences of organisms. So the DNA sequence of the daughter cells and the parent organism are exactly the same. So there's no variation seen in the DNA sequences between the daughter cells and the parent organism. As there are no differences, we cannot see any differences in the traits or features. The parent organism and the daughter cells will look alike because there is no change in their DNA sequence. Now, from an evolutionary perspective, this lack of variation can make the populations highly susceptible to any kinds of diseases or any environmental threats. So, this is the major disadvantage for all those organisms that are undergoing asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction, on the other hand, is a bit more complex and have extremely high energy requirements when compared with asexual reproduction. The other important feature is it requires the presence of two parents, and both the parents need to contribute half of their genetic material, which is called the DNA. So one parent or the male parent has to contribute half, while the female organism will contribute the other half of the genetic material. Both the parents will produce specialized cells called gametes. So we see the production of gametes in sexual reproduction. Now, gametes can be considered as haploid reproductive cells that contain half the number of chromosomes. Half the number of chromosomes compared to the parent organism. So if we take the case of human beings, we have a total of 46 chromosomes. So the gametes produced will have 23 chromosomes. And as we all know, the male parent will produce gametes that have 23 chromosomes, while the female parent will also produce gametes that will have 23 chromosomes. Now, both these gametes fuse at the time of fertilization to form a zygote, which is diploid in nature, or the zygote will have the same number of chromosomes as the parent organism. Now, this zygote will further develop into an embryo and form the future new organism. Now, fertilization can happen internally or externally. Fertilization is internal in most of the mammals, birds, as well as reptiles. So the fusion of gametes is taking place inside the female body. This is commonly seen in terrestrial organisms and some aquatic species. So the important point here is the egg cells are very well protected inside the body of a female organism. Now, external fertilization is commonly observed in fishes and amphibians. So here the male and female gametes are both released outside of the body, mostly into a water source, and the sperms need to find their way to reach the ova or the egg cells. So a large number of gametes have to be released so as to increase the chances of fertilization. Now, as the eggs and sperms are released outside the body, there are high chances of predation, and that's why the organisms usually produce a lot of gametes. Now, in sexual reproduction, it's important to note that genetic diversity is indeed observed, or due to a process called meiosis that takes place during the formation of gametes, there is some changes or mixing of the genetic material between the parents, and so the offspring that are produced are not exactly identical to the female or the male parent. This is due to the process of meiosis, which is a specialized cell division that is actually helping to reduce the chromosomal number by half. So, sexual reproduction takes longer and often requires more energy and complex reproductive organs, but this complexity is important because it allows the organisms to have genetic diversity. So, to conclude, asexual reproduction is a mode of reproduction that takes place without any fusion of gametes, and there's no exchange of genetic information. And due to this, the offspring produced will be exactly identical to their parents. However, in sexual mode of reproduction, this is a complex process and energy intensive. Both the male and female parents will produce gametes which has to fuse at the time of fertilization to form a new zygote which is having some amount of genetic diversity.